Pearl, yes, we're ready. So, what day is it today? Let's remind us.
Sunday, the
15th of January.
2012. Wow.
And what year? When were you born?
I was born in 1924.
What? In August?
3rd of August.
3rd of August. So how old does that make you? If that's not too rude a question.
That makes me 87 plus August, September, October, November, December, 4 months.
Okay.
So I'm well on nearly to 87 and a half.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Go on then.
And
wind me up.
Wind you up and point you in the right direction, and every now and again I'm going to stop you and point you in a different direction.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so Pearl, can you tell me what your earliest memory was?
My very earliest memory is of being taken to my first school. It was an infant school. Because I was 4 in the August, I started that September in the reception class. My father carried me on his shoulder. My mother had bought me new shoes and some white socks, and they were slightly too big for me, and she had to turn the toes of the sock under my toes, and I was very uncomfortable. But I knew that it was an exciting day for me. To go to school was something I was looking forward to. And because in those days all children had a third of a pint of milk in playtime in the morning, but in case I was going to be starving hungry, my mother sent me with a banana to have with the milk at playtime, but was coming home at 12 o'clock. So that's my earliest recollection.
Do you know what the school was called?
Seaforth Street Infant School. There was an infant layer, and then there was an upper layer called the junior mix. I eventually went from the infants into the junior mix. But in those days, I learned later on from my teaching life, the teachers the reception teacher took their children up for the 3 years in the infant school. If you started at 4+, you had 3 years in the infant school with the same teacher.
Okay, and where's Seaforth Street?
Seaforth Street is in the East End. In Cleveland, it was called Cleveland Street until I think just before the war or just after the war, I can't remember. Then it became Cleveland Way because there was a Cleveland Street West 1 and this was Cleveland Street East 1, the corner of which Myland Road was like that, and there was this famous superstore, you would call it nowadays, called Wickham's. It had every sort of department in that I can remember, and everybody knew Cleveland Street, but Seaforth Street was like round the back, and I was going into the main school through the back door, so to speak.
And you were living...
Seaforth Street was around the corner somewhere.
Okay. And were you living in Cleveland Way then?
Yes, I lived there. I was born in Ancliffe Street, which is off Commercial Road, until I was about 4. Then my father took this house and it was all rented. We knew nobody who owned their own house, so everywhere was people renting their rooms or their houses. But he had a workshop behind the house. There was no garden, no bathroom, no indoor toilets. There were 2 toilets, one in 4 rooms.
Two outside toilets.
Yeah, the house had no toilets inside, so we actually because fires were, you had to use coal. You had to have a coal window faced onto the street. I can remember my mother, before she married, and she married when she was about 21, she was a milliner, and she could do all sorts of things. I learned crochet from her and knit. She taught me all that.
Hat maker.
She made hats. I could make hats as well when I was 10 or 11. I knew, because I watched. She got my older brother, who was 6 or 7 years older than me, nearly 7. He was doing woodwork at school, and I remember he made her wooden stands, nice bases with a knob on the top, and she made hats and stood them in that window, hoping she would sell them. And she called herself, her name on the certificates was Jane. My father called her Janie, everybody else called her Ginny, and she called herself Madame Jeannette, you know, with in front of the hats. I always thought that was very funny.
So where did you sleep?
And so there was the parlour, these 2 rooms on that floor. Then there was another 2 rooms. The front room was the bedroom for the parents. The back room was where I slept. And when David was born, he was born when I was 4-ish. He was born in the October, so like I was 4 plus. And I can remember the nurse from the London hospital who came to bath him in the china bowl on the washstand in my mother's bedroom. And I was afraid to look at her for some reason. I don't remember if I had a reason at that stage. But I could only look at her through the mirror in the wardrobe to see if she was the same as she was before, if you know what I mean. And
You're scared to look at your mum?
That's my mother, yeah. And the nurse wore green garb with big wings. We called her the angel. And she wrapped David up. I can remember her doing the belly band round to hold the navel in. I can remember that clearly.
Do you remember, did you have...
And so I slept there, but then there were by this time it was, if I'm 1984, 28, we were approaching the Depression years, and the miners in the Rhondda Valley were having a terrible time. And they were sending out their 16-year-old girls to service. And my mother, being very forward-looking, she was a lot younger than my father, she and some of the other mums with young children got together, and they decided they would all hire the services of 16-year-olds from the Rhondda. And this girl was called Kitty Jenkins, who used to walk me to school, and eventually, I don't think she was there when David was born, maybe she was. She eventually, these girls always sat with the family. They were the original au pairs, but they weren't called au pairs.
So did she live with you?
Yes, she ate with us. She slept in my bedroom in the other bed. And eventually, Kitty Jenkins' mother came up from Wales, and she wore a Mary Poppins black straw hat, just like Mary Poppins, and she clutched, I can remember these clearly, a bunch of white big daisies, if that's what they were called, big, with still the black spots from the rain on the petals. It came to my mother, my mother was very well-mannered and very quiet, she was very everything. She was like an angel. And she also brought some Welsh cakes. And my mother was very kosher, very kosher. I was brought up very, very orthodox. And I thought, I knew that they were not kosher. I knew, don't ask me how.
Fat.
They were, it's the lard, yeah. And my mother thanked her graciously, and she brought them in a bag or something. So my mother gave her a plate, she put them on the plate, and she said to me, "You could have one of these, Pearl, if you like. Now, I love Welsh cakes. If I see them in a shop, I have to buy them." And I can remember that as clearly as yesterday.
Mm.
And this girl was with the family for 7 years, so David must have known her. And this Kitty Jenkins married a Jewish fellow called Lou. I don't know what his other name was. And my father made her a wedding present of a bright green military-style coat and gave it to her. And so that's...
So where would David have slept?
David eventually slept where the girl slept with me until it got to, you know, we were getting too much of an age. And my brother, who was 21 in 1939, got called up into the militia. So he left the put-you-up bed in the parlour, and that's when David went into the parlour to sleep.
So by that time, things would have changed.
Yeah.
So let me go back to Midlands. Can I just ask you to put that down, because I think the rustling,
waving about.
The rustling will come up on the...
Oh, okay, yeah. All right.
So you go back to your earliest memory of going to the school. Was there lots of Jewish people at the school?
No, the street we lived in didn't have as many Jewish people as, say, in the street where Abe lived. But my mother was very well liked by everybody, so we were all friendly with the non-Jewish people. There were some Jewish people around the side and round the back, and the people who had workshops were Jewish because they were making clothes, dresses, buttonhole making, and this kind of thing, all to do with making clothes. My father used to work for a firm called Caterpillar in old change buildings in the city. They would give him great bales of cloth from which they expected X number of coats or skirts or jackets or whatever, and a pattern. And he would cut them out and have the tailors and the...
He worked for them like a subcontractor?
As a subcontractor.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
he was in Russia, and there's nobody to confirm it, but I am sure he never ever did anything with clothes in Russia. He was a surgical instrument maker of some kind, but he also had to earn extra because life, you know, it was costly. I can remember him wallpapering the living, which we called the kitchen. It was a living room. He wallpapered the kitchen. I don't know where else he wallpapered. I learned how to wallpaper. I papered the house in Kenton when we moved, and Abe was just amazed that I knew what to do and how to do it. Even though I'm very short, I was able to walk on a plank, have a broom covered over with towels, and I was smoothing the paper on the ceilings.
Okay, so you learned quite a lot from
I
your dad.
learned a lot from watching my parents. They did a great deal of handwork. My mother was a great cook and baker, and in fact for Pesach she used to order what's called a long 100 of eggs, which is 120 eggs for the whole of the Pesach.
That's a lot of eggs.
A lot of eggs. She pickled cabbage, she made wine. We all helped to make cherry brandy, cherry wine. Then you add the brandy to make it brandy. But grapes, we bottled grapes into a big carboy. Yes.
Where did you get grapes from?
You bought them from the market in a tray that was full of sand. You had to clean them, you had to drop them in the long narrow neck of this carboy. I've still got a stone jug, a stone, I call it a jug, it's not, it's a stone jar, which my mother used to pickle cabbage, and she used to put apples in, and my older brother and I used to fight to get to the apples because they were whole, and when you cut them open, you ate it, it sizzled on your tongue.
Wow.
It was, I've never had it since.
What did you call that?
It was pickled cabbage. It was sauerkraut, really.
Yeah. So what do you know about your mum's history? Where was your mum born?
My mum was born in Poland, in a district called Kielce, Kielce, which many years later I passed when I was visiting Poland with the Esperantists. I saw an arrow pointing to Kielce, and I thought, it's familiar. She was brought here when she was 2. She was the middle girl of 3 girls, and then there was a brother, a younger brother.
So Jane isn't a Polish
Pardon?
name. Jane isn't a Polish name.
No,
Is that
her name was never Jane in Polish. I don't know what it was. But because she came here very young, then they went back to Poland for some reason. They had what I think we called a sort of a little inn, a little hostel that sold a bit of drink and let a few rooms, you know. That's what I think. I don't know. I never followed that up.
Do you know what year she was born?
I worked it out once, but that would take too long at the moment to work out.
Okay.
She married at 21. My brother was born in 1919, a year. So maybe she was 21 in 1918 or something like that.
So 1897, something like that.
I don't know. I did work it out once. They went back, but they came back here. My grandfather was very orthodox, knew his prayers without a siddur, and my mother used to take me over to see them. We had to walk on Shabbat because you didn't take a bus if you're going to see your grandparents, you know.
So you remember your mum's
My grandparents, my mother's parents were here.
Okay.
But my father apparently helped him have a little bit of a living, because my father by this time had got himself set up. He knew people who had workshops, and he got my grandfather to buy what they call cap pieces, bits of material that men used to wear, flat caps. That was cap pieces. And my booba, my grandmother, set up a little shop in the back room of all different kind of lengths of material that my grandfather sort of would bring back from workshops, and he would sit and make little labels and tags, and it would all be nicely laid out in the back room with shelving. And they had a very old-fashioned weighing machine. It had a big flat platform and an arm that you moved the weights across. And my cousin, who's going to be 89, she's only 18 months older than me, at the end of this month, she's in the Abbeyfield. And we used to meet there regularly because the 2 sisters, our mums were sisters, so they used to go and see their mother, and I used to play with Trudy. Her name was Gertrude, and we called her Geetle, but we now call her Trudy.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about Trudy.
Yeah, and she and I used to play jumping on and jumping off how many times and how much we had a ball when we went to Bubba.
So how old were you when your grandparents died? Do you remember?
Well, I got married when I was 22, and my grandfather, I came back from my honeymoon to his funeral. He died when we were away on honeymoon, and that was 1946. If you do your sums, you can find out. He died. Trudy has often said to me, he was the nearest person to a saint that we will ever meet. He was a wonderful man. He died he was 74, so you can find out how old he was. My grandmother lived till she was 88, and she was in the Clapham Jewish care place, and I used to go and visit her. I took the twins to see her when they were 4 months old. We had a baby each, we had a rucksack each, and we had a little tiny chariot thing that we could push the kids in, and my grandmother was absolutely over the moon and organised somebody who had a private room, and so I was able to feed the children and change them all in this ladies' room. Everybody in the place knew about these twins.
Quite a vivid memory.
Oh yeah, and she was so shrewd, my grandmother. She said, when you go and spotlessly clean, I mean, my mother would turn in her grave if she saw this room. She really, how dare I get to this stage? But I got to this stage.
But you must have been...
But she was, I think, she was so fussy, my bubba and my mother, that I think that I internally rebelled. That's what I think.
You're different.
But I'm come off the point.
Yes, it's okay, it's fine. So you must have been quite young when your mother died.
I was 11.
11. And
Yeah.
was she ill?
She was 39.
Had she been ill?
We went, a little bit of history. My father, who was Russian, knew about dachas. Dacha is a summer house. Yeah. And when he was able, like when he got established and he had a family, I can remember going to Canvey Island, where he'd hired from the local fishmonger in Hessel Street, who we knew very well. Hessel Street was a street of Jews with all sorts of shops, you know, fish shops, chickens. You could buy feathers, everything for a Jewish life.
All kosher.
It was all for Jewish people had organised themselves, and you could buy everything there. In fact, my father bought my first, we call it a duvet, but we used to call it the Russian word, parana, which was a big, like a cushion with the feathers in. It wasn't seamed down, so that if you turned over, all the feathers went that way and you were left with the 2 layers of cotton on your back, you know. We used to hate it. We wanted blankets. We wanted to be modern. But for my wedding trousseau, my father bought my feathers in Hessel Street. And that eventually got turned into an eiderdown, eventually.
But your wedding, what?
My wedding was in 1946.
You used a word there that I don't know.
Parana?
No, after you said for your wedding something, your father bought...
Trousseau.
Oh, trousseau, that's the...
Yeah, you know, everybody, old women used to work and embroider things and have things for their trousseau. Before you married, you went with nice underwear, decorated, you had all sorts of lovely things. I made tablecloths and embroidered them. I've still got one that I made in 1942. I've embroidered the date on it.
So you were going back. I asked about what your mum and whether she was ill. And you were
no,
going
she
back
was. Yeah. So my dad used to hire this bungalow from Yantian every summer for a month, and my mum and me and David and her sister Lily and Trudy, that was Trudy's mum, and Trudy and all the brood. She was the oldest of that family. We all went to live on Canvey Island for a month, and the men, my dad and my older brother, who was by then working in the workshop, and my uncle Jaime, Trudy's dad, used to come down at weekends with the chickens and the fish and the wurst and the viennas for the whole week, for the weekend and for the week. And for a whole month we were away from the dust and the street.
Sounds amazing.
August. My cousin has been telling me time and time again how much he now appreciates the fact that my father was such a clever man. And he had this idea he looks for gadgets. That's why I'm gadget mad and why my older brother, and David isn't, but my older brother used to be gadget mad as well. So we had this, I had a very, although it was difficult with finance, and as I got older, after my mother died, my father kept all the rules and regulations about Shiva, and after the year, and by that time I was dealing with chicken, making shabbos, I could fry fish, I kept the family going, and my father said, "You've got to go to school." I won my way to I had won a scholarship to a free school, which I didn't want to go to because it was boys and girls mixed. I knew what boys had. I didn't want to go to have fun with boys. I wanted to study. And I went to a girls' school, which I'd heard about, that it was a good school.
Where was that?
In Clapton. That I had to go on a tram for that. And my mother took me for the interviews for that school. She met the head, and she listened to my answers at the interview. She then had to bring me to the same school to be measured for my uniform, but she was lying in a coffin the day my uniform arrived. And my father, who appreciated learning, and he was very well versed in Torah. Everybody looked to him for answers when there was no rabbi around. And he valued education. And he said to me, "Yeah, you're not going to be cooking and maching here. You're going to go to school." And he took me the first day to school, to my grammar school as well. I remember clearly.
So did you have to take 11 plus?
That was before the 11 plus. It was called there was a preliminary. We used to call it the prelim. Everybody sat at the top end of the junior school. Everybody sat for that. They weeded out the children who were then appointed to take the final exam, and there were only 4 out of the whole class of about 40. I was one of the 4. There were 2 girls and 2 boys. Now, I was extremely timid and very, very strongly dominated by my father, because if he said something, you didn't question it. You didn't argue. You had to wheedle your way if you wanted something special. And the other boy also was not a very strong favourite, Morris Kingston. Now, the head, who happened to be Jewish, his name was Gershel, he gave me the feeling then that kind of don't expect that you'll get to the high school. We called them high schools then. But you might make Central School, which was also very high standard, much more vocational. And the other 2, Nathan Chabinsky, and he was Jewish too, so there were 3 Jewish kids and 1 girl called Gladys Hibbert. She wasn't Jewish. And these were the brilliant girls, these were the clever ones, they didn't make it. And Morris and I made it. He went to a school called Davenant Foundation in Whitechapel, and I went to this very good school called Clapton County Secondary School, which eventually got changed to, everybody called it Laura Place, because it was in a little cul-de-sac called Laura Place.
And during all this time your mother passed away?
Yeah, my mother died before I started school there.
Why did she die?
Pardon? This is what happened. For years and years and years we were going to Canvey Island for the holidays, and her dearest friend called Bessie Arsakovich, her husband was a stoller, a carpenter, well known to my dad and mum. Bessie said, "It's time you went on a real holiday, not to keep going to that stupid place where there's no toilets, you have to go down the garden, to the can." And we went to Cliftonville, and she got sunstroke.
Where's Cliftonville?
Cliftonville is near Margate.
Okay. And she got sunstroke?
She got sunstroke, and in those days, sulfonylamides had not been dreamed up yet. She was, she had sunstroke, and eventually it affected her heart. she only lived 2 weeks after that holiday. I could not go to Cliftonville for years and years and years and years and years. I just couldn't go to Cliftonville. My cousin seems to think she might have had a brain tumour because there were 2 people in the Belitsky family, that was her family, who had brain tumours. So she said it could be. I said, I don't know. All I know is her death certificate said heart failure at 39.
And so she didn't have a long period of illness, 2 weeks. And that...
2 weeks. She didn't suffer. She didn't know where she was. My father was doing his night. He worshipped the ground she walked on.
Do you remember how you dealt with that?
How I felt? Well, that's how I feel now.
Yes, of course. But how did you cope with it?
Pardon?
How did you cope with it? Did it...
Badly. I missed her terribly because I had 2 brothers. I'd got an older brother and younger brother. My father was very dominant, very. If he could explain something, he would learn from it. But I mean, he was very good at maths and did everything in his head. So he didn't master English very well because he had a very heavy accent. But he knew what day of the week. Well, he could tell the taxi driver to cut out going round China because he knew the way better than the taxi driver, you know, where to go and how to travel to the city.
And how was your mum's English?
Pardon?
How was your mum's English?
My mother spoke English because she came here back.
She was 2.
She was 3. She went to Jewish free school in the lane. We called the lane. It was Middlesex Street somewhere. It was called the Jews free school. But there was no money for her to go to any decent school, so she was apprenticed to a milliner. And she made all my clothes. She made my dresses. I went to school on. I remember the first photograph we had at school when I was little in the reception class, and the teacher said the photographer's coming tomorrow. Whatever time. So we used to have to lie down on oval mats in the afternoon in school. So come back from lunch and then we'll have the photograph done. And
you had to lie down? Why did you have to lie down?
All the children in the reception classes
have a rest.
Have a rest.
Yeah.
And it was these oval mats and we all got down and we had a 20-minute whatever, I don't remember that. But I do remember this. My mother sent me to school with a peach-coloured, silky, hand-crocheted dress with a white Angora furry line here, with a low-slung waist, with a big ribbon, chocolate box ribbon we call it, with a big bow on the bum. And I turned up to school for a school photograph in that. And Miss Drake, who was the teacher, I'll tell you about her in a minute, she said, "Oh, Pearl, I don't think you should lie down today, and you can sit up whilst the others have their rest." And I thought, you know, I'm a favoured child, you know. I remember that clearly. Don't remember the photograph, but I remember that. Miss Drake was the infant teacher that took me through 3 years. Then she watched my progress in the junior years. I didn't know she was following up my career at the grammar school. However, many, many years later, when I'd been teaching a couple of years, and I got this urge to tell somebody who was alive that I finally made my childish wish to become a teacher. It came to be. And I don't know what possessed me. I wrote a letter to Miss Drake. I put it in another envelope with a letter to the current head teacher of Seaford Street JM&I School and said, "Please could you find a way of getting my enclosed letter to Miss Drake because she taught me as an infant." Would you believe? Now, the boys must have been about... 1962 was when I went to college. The boys were 12 because they were born in 50. came out 65, they were 15. Maybe I was teaching 2 years when I'd done probationary year and I began to feel like I was a real teacher. And when my letter arrived at the school, that evening, Miss Drake appeared to do her stint, her voluntary stint, to do the play groups for children after school. Can you believe that? And so she immediately got in touch with me, and on one Sunday she came over for a Sunday meal, and she was sitting with the boys one side, each side of her, and she was admonishing them in a fun way, saying, you know, I knew your mother when she was blah, 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 you know, we all had a great big laugh. And we kept in touch. And I told her all the things I remembered about when I got the free place to this other school. She came to my dad and she said, I'd like to take Paul out for a treat. So would he allow it? And she said, yeah. He said yes. She took me to Lyons Corner House and she bought me a cake which had like butterfly wings and a green handle.
Amazing.
With a cherry on the top. And I came home with a shaped bottle like that of tiny little coloured satin sweeties. That was before the results came out for the Junior County Scholarship, which I won. So she came to my father and she said she'd like to take me out, and he said okay. She took me to her flat. Now, when she was sitting at my table, when I was already, you know, of an age, and I said to her, I still called her Miss Drake, her name was Elsie, and I said, yeah, I can remember you took me to your flat in Earl's Court. She said, no, Pearl, Barons Court. You see, I didn't know of a Barons Court.
No.
I only knew of Earl's Court, but she lived actually in Barons Court, in a pioneer women's block of flats, because she never married. And I said to her, I can remember being amazed when you opened a cupboard, and I said, and inside there was a sink and a tap, and you had stockings hanging there to dry. And I said, you also had some form of heating in the hall, which I'd never seen in my life, which was a storage heater. And she could not believe that a child of 11 could have taken such note.
The detail.
Indeed, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we stayed in touch, and of course she died. Obviously, she was of an age.
So you said you wanted to be a teacher from an early age?
From very, very early on, I wanted to teach. My father wanted me to study medicine because I was named after an aunt of his called Persia. And I can't believe that she was what we call officially a doctor, because Russian Jewish women, Jews weren't allowed to go to school, like it was rationed, if you know what I mean. There's a word for it.
Yes. What year did he come from Russia?
Pardon?
When did he come from
He
Russia?
came from Russia, I think in 1916. He was not fit to go into the army. I've got his papers still somewhere. I had them translated.
What health problems did he?
He had to wear glasses, and he was flat-footed. I mean, he would never have made a soldier.
No,
but I think that there was a little bit of greasing. I think because he was the only son. He had two sisters, and I think they must have all been frightened of him going into the army. But anyway, he came here in 1916, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back. Do you need a break? Are you all right?
No, I'm all right. I can go on talking for hours. Don't you know that?
I do.
You do know that.
Okay. So,
yeah, where were we?
I'm going to come back to one of my questions.
My dad wanted me to study medicine. I never argued with him because you never got anywhere with him. But I thought, I'll work hard in school, and I will do exams, and when I'm old enough and I go to university, I'll decide what I'm going to study. I was very good at languages, not so good at English because I didn't hear good English.
No, Yiddish.
I did German and Latin. He wanted me, definitely I had to learn Latin, not French. And I think that was behind his thoughts, that, you know, if you're going to be a medic, you've got to know Latin. I also, my English improved after I studied the Latin. And so I was always very grateful about that.
So he spoke Yiddish to you?
Yeah, Yiddish I could speak, I could write and I could read. That also stood me in good stead on one occasion. And that's where I learned my special way of teaching now, language, Hebrew to children who have no Hebrew language. Somebody gave me a letter to read. It was written by her husband to her future father-in-law, but it was in writing that she couldn't understand, and it was Yiddish. It was Yiddish writing. It was, I've got the heating on, are you cold?
No, it's fine.
So when I looked at it, I said, you know, Gretel, this is in Yiddish. And as I started reading, I got familiar with the handwriting style, which is, you've got to learn as you go along. It was asking for the hand in marriage of the daughter, but it was, I was actually reading Yiddish, but it's coming out German. So my friend could understand it. She couldn't understand it. And that's how I teach my kids Hebrew. I write Hebrew characters, but they make English words. And when they can spell it out, if it says pig, then it's pig, then I know I've read it right.
Yes,
if you don't know the Hebrew word, how do you know if it's right or not? So
sometime after your mother died, there was a period of shiver, and then at sometime, your father met my grandmother.
He was introduced to the person I called Auntie Esther. From the back, she had my mother's stature. She was tall, taller than my father, same as my mum. She was standing in a stocking feet on that picture, because she was sort of a bit taller than my dad on the picture. So the photographer said, no, take your shoes off, madam. I remember.
He was introduced to her. So
it was somebody, my father knew this guy called
Lubin?
Abraham, I've forgotten his name, Lubin. And his wife had died some years before. He married Auntie Esther, and he died, broke his leg and he died 6 weeks later. So she was like, again, on her own. And the circle that my father mixed in, you know, so, you know, why don't you get it? They got together. That's how that happened.
And what are your memories of that time?
My memories, well, I don't remember exactly when they got married. I know that she had to also, the both of them used to have to go to the police station and sign in.
Yes.
No, he didn't, but she did.
She carried on. She always had to do that.
Yeah, that was, I didn't understand why that happened.
It must have been somewhere 37, 38.
Yes, it was. Well, yes.
No, 36.
Your mother was
35,
born in 37.
35, 36.
Yeah. Well, my mother died in 1935, so they must have married in 1936, and Gilda was born in 1937, and I was about 13, and I had a living doll, and I took her everywhere. I knitted for her, I sewed for her, and she was my baby, and I used to wheel her in the pram miles around. Everybody knew me and pushing this baby. And years and years and years later, I learned that my family used to refer to me as the nursemaid. Because I did. When the health visitor came to see how Auntie Esther was managing with the baby, I mean, she was already very, like set in her ways as a spinster, really. And she was frightened to hold this tiny baby. I didn't have any fear. I knew I couldn't break the baby, but, you know, my Auntie Esther was frightened of it. And I would dress the child, you know, and the health visitor said, you know, Mother, your eldest daughter handles this baby like as if it's her own. And I'm going, yeah, it is my own. You know, like I knew, I don't know how I knew. I just knew how to handle a baby. It was something very special. And that's why we have got something very special between us, your mother and me.
And then Rita came along in 39?
Yeah, came, and when she was 2.5, she was bigger than your mother. And I said to I couldn't say this to Auntie Esther, but I could say to my father, you must persuade Auntie Esther to take this girl to the hospital. There is something wrong with her that maybe could be sorted out. She's growing too fast, too quickly, and something will happen. It's not right. I could tell by Gilda, you see. I persuaded him not to register as Golda, but apparently your mother says on her birth certificate it is Golda.
Why did you want to not to do that?
My father, when he first came over to England, lodged in a room in a house in a street called Anchor Street where I was born. That's where there were 2 elderly women living on the ground floor, and there was this little flat upstairs. And one of the women was a Mrs. Bowen, and her name was Golda. And because she had no family alive anymore, she was old, and my father respected her, and he must have said to her, if I ever have a daughter, I'll call her after you to remember you. And I said, you can't call a baby Golda in this country.
Is it an old woman's name? Old Jewish woman?
I thought it was like an old woman's name, and it was very Jewish, and it's bad enough we got Yeselevsky, but you don't want to call her Golda in school. And I knew about Gilda because I was an opera fan already. My father loved opera, so he took me to opera. And I knew there was a Gilda or a Gilda, but I mean, it was Gilda to me. And everybody called her Gilda, and I could have sworn it was on her birth certificate, but I think she's told me no that she's
Golda.
definitely Golda. But I mean, I didn't know about Golda Meir, or after a few years, foreign names didn't mean what they meant when I was growing up.
So when you were growing up in the East End, how did the Jews and the non-Jews mix?
There were definitely pockets of Jews. There were friendly non-Jews, but there were also very anti-Semitic Jews. And we lived in Cleveland Street. We lived like a few streets away from the fascists in Bethnal Green and Salmon and Bourne. That was the hotbed of the anti-Semites. And I was not allowed to go to Bethnal Green Library on my own. And certainly my Zayda, my grandfather, who had a little white silvery beard, and he wore his couple underneath his bowler hat, so his head was never uncovered. He's had his beard pulled by fascists in the street. So there were friendly Christians and there were, or non-Jews, let's say. They weren't all practicing Christians, but I never had any trouble in Cleveland Street or in my school in the early days. And in my grammar school, there were 45% Jewish girls and 55% non-Jews. So there was never any, I mean, the hymns always missed out the Jesus verses, only hymns about God, and there was never any reference to Jesus in the sermons or whatever you call it. And we had religious instruction.
What about the food?
The food, I was definitely, we all had, the Jewish girls mostly had vegetarian. They weren't as interesting meals as nowadays, and I hated the rissoles, the lentil rissoles. They were full of one of the herbs I can't stand now because of that. But so, you know, or you brought your own lunch.
Okay. So let's go back.
Go back.
So around about the time that Rita was born, the war started.
Yes,
What
so
do you remember?
that's right.
What was
So
the war?
now, Auntie Esther never did. She went to the hospital about Rita being big for her age, and they wanted to keep her in for observation, and she wouldn't let her stay, and she did nothing about it. That's why she got to 24 stone. They couldn't find a bed to hold her in the hospital. Finally, she had to sleep in a chair. The war came in 1939, and there was a big. David and I were evacuated with my school to Bishop Stortford and to Little Haddon, which is a village outside Bishop Stortford.
The whole school got evacuated.
The whole school, yeah. And he had the time of his life. He was on a farm with the brother of another girl in my form. So the two boys were together. He learned to ride a bike. He had a whale of a time. And we were lodged in a tiny little cottage, Betty and I. We were left rather to the end because we both had a brother each, until some bright spark said, why don't you two girls go together and let the two boys go together? And that's when they found us a billet.
Did you ever see your father? Did you?
He only came up from Liverpool Street occasionally. That was at the beginning. Auntie Esther and the two children, eventually, they went to
Leicester? Leeds?
No, before Leicester.
Is it Leeds?
No, one of the side counties. It's several syllables. And then they went back home because it was a phony war. And then they went again, and it was somewhere in Leicestershire, and I went to visit them there as well, eventually. My father didn't have it. He was stitching up gas mask covers on a machine himself in order to sell them in the market to make a bit of money. I had a postal order for 5 shillings that had to last me forever, because I didn't know when I was going to get any more. And that had to buy me sanitary towels as well, and give David a bit of pocket money. But after when we were that evening, we were the last to be billeted, and I said to Betty, look, I'm going to tell her I'm Jewish because I won't eat bacon, and I don't want a big discussion when the food is already on the plate. And with a name like Yaselewski, you know, it reached from one end of my satchel to the other. So Betty Hyman said, and she had a very hooked nose, a very swarthy skin, full of blackheads, and I didn't look Jewish at that time. I had very dark hair and light blue eyes, so she said, I don't know why you want to tell her. I said, look, you can please yourself what you do. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. So we came in and she made us a hot drink, and I said to her, before I unpack, and I'd like to tell you that I'm Jewish. And so she said, you're not Jewish. I said, Mrs. Thurgood, I am Jewish. No, you're not Jewish. And I said, but my parents are. My mother was, my stepmother is, my father is, my grandparents are. I said, I am Jewish. And she said, I said, how can you say I'm not Jewish? Why are you saying I'm not Jewish? She said, you know what? I mean, this is true.
I know what you're going to say.
You know, she came round to, I had this big dining chair, and my head was against the chair, and she pulled my hair back and she said, you haven't got horns.
Is that true? Is that really?
It is true. And I told this to somebody in wherever I was, and I can't remember where it was, and they said that happened to them.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Ignorance.
She was all of 27. I worked that out once. She was very kind. Oh, it didn't matter. After that all calmed down, I said, and then we were only there for 2 weeks, and then we got billeted into Bishop Stortford, because we shared Herts and Essex High School. Sometimes we went to school in the morning and not in the afternoon, and vice versa. I don't know how they arranged it, but I know that they did. And Mrs. Philby, her name was, she didn't have any children. And her husband went to work in London with striped trousers and a black jacket and a bowler hat and a stick. I mean, he was a lovely man too. And the first thing she did was to say, look girls, I won't manage with a sugar ration. And she said, I'd be obliged if you'd cut down on your sugar lumps, because at that time we were using sugar lumps. And in this big willow pattern cup, I used to put 2 lumps of sugar in, cover it with milk, and then pour the tea over out the teapot. I know that Betty's mother used to bring her sugar from home. How she got extra sugar or saved the sugar, I don't know. I had not got that. I couldn't expect sugar to come from Auntie Esther or my dad bring it, because I didn't see them. So what did I do? I said to her, I was very hurt. I won't take any sugar anymore, knowing that they've got a sugar ration, but it wasn't going to meet her requirements. So she said, no, don't do that, Paul. Just take 1 lump. And I said, no, it won't be sweet enough. I will do without. And from that day to this, I do not take sugar in my tea. I'll have it in a black coffee, but not in tea.
What's the story? So do you remember the end of the war?
Pardon?
Do you remember the war ending?
Yes, I do. I remember... Oh, during the war, let me tell you, that came into my mind when thinking about this interview. Abe proposed to me from Italy on the 1st of December. What year, I can't remember. 42, I think. I met him beforehand.
Where did you meet
I already had a boyfriend, but I thought, this is the man I'm going to marry. I don't know how, but this is the man I'm going to marry.
How did you meet him?
In the left-wing movement. He was already a soldier, so he turned 21. And we had a system in the left-wing movement to supply soldiers with seditious literature.
So kind of left-wing movement? Because
anybody with any brains in the East End was somehow attached to a left-wing movement, either the socialists or the communists. You just could not be otherwise. So, but the real beginning was a girl at my school 1 year up from me lived further into the East End. And she came to me one day and she said, I know you've got a typewriter, because my father, he knew I couldn't stay on to go to university, and he said, I can keep you on at school if you go into the commercial 6th and learn to be a secretary, make a living. That's what's going to happen, which is what happened. But he bought me a second-hand portable typewriter, 4-bank. He knew about that. So I don't know how this Fay Weiner got to know I'd got a typewriter. So she said, could I come and borrow it? No, I said, you can't borrow it, but if you want to type on it, I know my dad won't let you have it. You can come to my house and do whatever you want to do there. And it didn't have a gadget to cut stencils. You had to take the ribbon out to cut a stencil. And she cut the stencil, and it was... a bit, at that time, the Daily Worker was banned. I didn't know this, and there's this article that she was typing out for the Stepney Worker. And I said, but we, you know, our school was like, everything was right about our government and our laws, and we have freedom of speech. How comes that they're banning a newspaper? I said, that's not right. That's how I got into the left-wing movement.
And you used to go to meetings, did you?
Yeah, I started to go to meetings.
How old were you, roughly?
Pardon?
How old would you have been then?
Well, this was... I left school when I was 17, say. 16, 17, something like that. So that's how I got to meet people. And I had a boyfriend. My friends the friend I went out with, her brother took a shine to me, and I was flattered. And I mean, I wore heavy rimmed glasses. I had to wear my mother's frames because it was cheaper than having new frames. So I looked a bit like an owl. I had a load of frizzy black dark hair, and I was always chubby, never fat, but cuddly, my sons used to say. And I didn't think I was attractive. And here's a guy wants to take me out. Yeah, so I went. So I got friendly with Harold. But I met this guy in the left-wing movement, and when it came to him going overseas, he said to me, would you be prepared to take my literature that I have every week to my home in Clark Street, and they'll pay you for it? And I said, well, that's not the important thing. It's getting it to you. So that's how that started. But I knew somehow that he took a shine to me too, but he thought he was so much older than me, and he was going overseas, so he didn't want to say anything. He took me out just before he left, and he asked his permission if he could kiss me goodbye. So I let him kiss me goodbye, and that was that. And I thought, I'm sure it's more after more than that. And he
did you correspond?
On one leave just before, and he said, will you write to me? I said, if you write to me, I'll answer. If you write to me, I will answer. So he started writing to me and putting his thoughts on paper, and he was reading from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and I had also a copy, and we were bantering.
Did your father know about this?
Yeah. He met the other guy who came down who my father liked, so he thought that maybe something will come of that. He also met Abe. Yeah, no, it was no secret. He walked me home, you know. And
how did your father and Abe get on?
But they respected one another, very much so, up to a point that involved the wedding money presents, because my father didn't have enough money to make my wedding. So
what about the politics? Where was your father with that?
Politics was very left-wing.
But your father didn't
He wasn't in the movement. No.
But he didn't mind that you...
No, he didn't mind. No, he didn't mind me at all. Didn't mind my being friendly with people that thought about matters. So eventually, Abe proposed to me from Italy on the 1st of December, what year it was. I've still got his letter. And I told my dad, he said, "Bummy, you're not engaged till he comes home." I said, "But he sent me a ring." That ring is not good enough. It was a carved rose coral ring, which I cherished. You've got to have a diamond ring. I don't want a diamond ring. No, I've got a ring. No, you'll have to wait till he comes home. And he came home on VE Day. And I thought afterwards, what a nerve. I went away, we weren't even cuddling, you know. And here I'm seeing this guy. How are we going to feel? But there wasn't... I knew him inside out, and he knew me inside out through writing. I got all his letters, and he had all mine. We had a system of numbering the letters because we used to send some by what we called C-mail, which was SL stroke whatever number, and there were telegram type things, forget aerograms, and they had a different number, and they went very quickly. And during that period, when he decided and I'd agreed that we were a unit, he got, because I heard on the radio a record being asked to be played by somebody, Richard Tauber singing "You Are My Heart's Delight," and Abe had asked in Forces Sweethearts or something that somebody was playing records by request, and he asked for that to be played for me, and the whole family was sitting round the radio while Richard Tauber sang to me at Abe's request, "You Are My Heart's Delight."
How lovely.
Yeah.
So when did you get married?
He came in 1945. We got married in 46.
So were you you'd left school by then? Were you working somewhere?
I was working for my first job was for a professional secretary, Jewish chap called Alfred A. Burmel, who was secretary to 5 Jewish organisations. This is before there's a guy that started the National House.
No,
B starts with a B. Never mind.
Bevan.
No, another one.
Beveridge.
Before the Beveridge plant.
Right.
So the people paid 6p a week for HSA vouchers. I used to take their money, and if they needed an inpatient voucher, I would give them a voucher, or outpatient. That meant they didn't have to pay. Jewish Friendly Societies for other cover, Association of Jewish Friendly Societies, Jewish Convalescent Home, a 5th one, I can't remember, 5. So I was all of 16, half 17, whatever. The woman who was leaving was getting married. She was supposed to be with me 2 weeks. She left after 1 week, and I was holding the fort. I was very efficient. What I didn't like was the man who promised me a raise in 6 months' time, like from when I was taken on, and he didn't keep his promise. So I blew him a big raspberry, and I looked for another job. And I worked for T. Boeing. They were dispensing opticians for the Royal Westminster Eye Hospital, which I learned a great deal about eyes and glasses and so on. And I worked as a clerical help in that situation.
Did you have some? You had some qualifications in this?
I did Greg's shorthand, and I could type. I touch type, and I did bookkeeping. I could keep a set of books to trial balance, but I had to walk to work sometimes over glass and hose pipes and stuff like that into Holborn, and my dad hated that sort. Opposite where we lived was a place called Barron's Crown Pickle Works, and Henry Barron knew my father for years. And he once said to Dad, "What is Pearl doing these days?" And my father said, "She's working in Holborn," and told him the story. And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, Ada Brennan," that was his secretary, is leaving to get married. Could he tell me to go and have an interview with him? So I went to have an interview with Barron, and I got the job, and I loved it because there was a lot to do at that time. Establish the filing system and sort things out. There were 2 vans that went out. I had to check the goods when they went out. I had to check when they come back. I had to check the money. I had to do the wages for all the women that worked there, and I had to know how many half crowns, 2p, money. I had to get the right sort of money from the bank in order to put them in wage packets. I did all that, and I still had time on my hands, and I got established with Henry Barron that if I've got nothing to do and he can't find me a job, can I please read a book? Then from that it went on, can I please embroider my tablecloth for my trousseau? And the woman next door used to come in to me when Barron was having his coffee in Whitechapel at Lyons. She trimmed my hair round, Pearl. I used to cut people's hair. And because it was too expensive to go, I did all sorts of mad things. Anyway.
So when did you get married?
And when did I get married? The 1st of September 1946. And we lived in 2 rooms. Would you believe the girl whose name I told you, Faye Weiner, who did the Stepney worker thing, her father lived in a house like 2 rooms. That's how they were. No toilet. Yeah, there was a toilet downstairs inside.
Where was it?
And we had the 2 rooms at the top and a quarter of a circle for a sink. So I had 1 bedroom and 1 sitting room and 48 inches on the landing, which I made my kitchen, 24 inches for a gas stove and 24 inches for an orange box to keep my saucepans in.
Where was this?
In in Ashfield Street, and I lived there for 3 years and a bit.
And when was Uncle Abe, where was he working?
He was working for Winsmore at that time, and then he wasn't going to give any key money for a flat he had too many good principles. I would have done that, but he wouldn't. So I said, well, we're never going to move out of this place, and I'm not having any children in this place because of the stairs. They were very narrow.
So what's Winsmore? What did he do?
What did he do? He was a passer. He inspected the finished garment. He didn't like what he was doing. He hated being in the fashion industry, because when he was 14 or 15 and studying at the public school of steam and navigation or something, some long time, his father asked him to take the coat to the buttonhole maker, and he didn't do it straight away, and he got tasked the second time, and the third time his father swept all his books into the fire, and after that did something terrible to Abe's mental state about learning. And when our boys were showing promise at school, I knew I had to earn some money. I was earning a bit of money doing books. After Abe came home from work, I went out to do accounts, to a couple of jobs, but it wasn't stable enough for me. So that's when I went to the local Willesden Education Office and volunteered to be a dinner lady, so I could earn some money regularly and be home for when my boys came home from school. I could take them to school, do my job, and then pick them up and take them home. And when the fellow was writing down my history of schooling, he said, "We can train you to be a teacher." I said, "You're joking, I'm 38. And he said, "Well, unfortunately, this year they're changing from 3 years training to 2 years training. But he said, you could still give us about 20 years. We would train you." I said, "Would I get a grant?" So he said, yes. I came home, I said to him, "What do you think?" He said, "You're earning £3 a week, and without that £3 bill, we will not be able to manage. We had the house, we had no floor covering. I made over curtains."
We jumped ahead. Which house are we talking about?
No, that was a house after the 2.5, 3 years in the pokey state.
Yes.
And because he wouldn't pay any key money to get a decent place, we got these 6 rooms above a shop in Tottenham. And I let a room at the top. But there was an indoor toilet, so but that's where we lived at the time.
And the boys were born there?
Boys were born there, and that's why I think I got in trouble with my back. I was carrying them up 15 stairs and back down, take the other one up, take the other one down, until I couldn't carry them anymore. And pushing them up the hill and down the hill.
And they were born in 1950?
I think, yeah, this is my lower back problem.
And so you stopped working when the boys were born? Or?
No, yeah. Well, at the beginning, Abe wouldn't let me work. So I had to say, well, if I earn any money, I won't put it into the kitty. But going to when I got a grant, I did get a grant for £3. It worked out, a term's money was actually working out to £3 a week. And I did 3 years. And it was, at first I thought, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I can do this. Be with girls of 19 and 20. But I actually let my hair down a bit with them as well. And I'm still in touch with some of them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Where was the college?
The main college was in Twickenham, but they'd opened an annex in Willesden.
So how did you get there? Was that a long journey?
No, I got from... I got on the train. I was... yeah. I must have been in the house.
So what do you remember of the years when the boys were young?
I loved having them. They were very good to bring up, and I never shouted at them. And if they were naughty in public, I would just bend over and whisper in their ear. And whatever it was, their eyes glazed over and they stopped what they were doing. And everybody was amazed. They were very good to bring up. We used to take them everywhere. They always behaved in public very decently. Gilda loved them. She would come and look after them for me whenever I wasn't well. Or, you know, she got on very well with them. Fussed them.
And some point you moved from that house?
Pardon?
Some point you moved from the house in Tottenham?
Oh yeah, when in 1957 we moved to the house because Abe had got himself established as a production manager in a pleated skirt factory. And I think we'd been in the house some few months. We moved, say, in the June, following April, when he goes to, I mean, it was really, it was difficult. We didn't have enough money. We had just about enough to put down as a deposit. And the boys, I mean, I wasn't working then. I was only doing what I could, like when Abe came home and I went out to do a couple of book sets of books. But lost my train of thought.
But isn't that, Mum always said some story about
what?
Uncle Abe doing some sort of deal with his employer about the house, about him helping with the mortgage or something instead of...
No, it was my nephew's, one of my nephews, he's what I call a wide boy. He needed...
You can pause it.
Hello, Trudy.
Okay, the house.
So many stories.
Yes, I know.
Oh, yeah.
I'll come back and do it another time.
Yeah, but this
nephew.
What happened was, Abe wanted to help his nephew. Yeah, we hadn't got any money, but we had the house. That was So he said, like, we were going to guarantee him the money on the strength of the house. I don't know how it was arranged, but it was Lloyd's, I remember. And then it got to the stage where his business wasn't doing what it should have done, and I couldn't see me ever I couldn't sleep. You know, that's why Gilda eventually got to know all about it, because I couldn't keep it to myself. And I thought that they would take the house away from me, us.
Right, okay.
And then Abe talked to his nephew, and oh God, you know, I can't remember how upset everybody became. But Lewis, who was a dentist, said, "Paul, you know, I wouldn't let that happen to you." I said, but why should you be brought into it if your brother doesn't honour his death?
This wasn't the story I was thinking of. It was about how you came to get the house in the first place. No, don't remember anything about that. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah, don't remember anything about that.
Somewhere your father died in 52, 53?
No, he died in 55.
55.
And he said to me, "You're going to have a very bad year in 1956.
What do you remember about that period? That
was his telephone number.
Right. What do you remember about that period?
That period. All I know is, like, from what I wasn't anywhere near home. I had my own problems and my own... Yeah. All I know that he had this stroke.
He had several strokes, didn't he?
Yeah, but the stroke that they had to take him out of the window. He always worried that he would go blind because his mother went blind at a very old age. And she was a knitter. She knitted everything, and I think that's where I've inherited my capabilities in that regard as well. He was in hospital, and he was conscious, and he was getting better, and then he died a year late. He died just after that. But he said to me, "You're going to have a very bad year in 1956. My father-in-law died in 56. My mother-in-law died in 56. My uncle died in 1956. and I had a terrible year. There were also AIDS relations, so I can't tell you how many died in that year. Now, why should he have thought that? His telephone number was 1956.
Strange.
Very strange, very strange.
And before that, there was the fire.
The fire, I didn't know much about it.
You weren't
All I know is what I was told, and it doesn't always stay with you because I didn't have any images. David worked with my father, and Alf had worked with him until his missus drove him so mad he had to leave. That caused rather a big family row, and I wasn't into it. I couldn't see why they should have done all that, but there you go, that's what happened. But Gilda was of an age where she was very young, but not so young that she didn't know what was happening.
Sure.
So she saw things that I never saw.
Okay. I'll ask her more about that.
Yeah.
So let's go to the things that you know most about. So your wedding, you haven't said much about your wedding.
My wedding, I didn't want a big wedding. That was because I knew my mother's relations would want to be there, and I knew my stepmother's relations would want to be there, and I thought how awful it would be for both lots, because through the death of one, they're all sitting there together. I mean, it was the unhappiest day of my life. And my father insisted that I had a big wedding. I knew he hadn't got the money. I hadn't got the money. He would have his way.
So where did you get married?
He got married in Great Garden Street Synagogue with Rabbi Shaboshnik. It had to be floral and coral. It had to, and I had to stand for ages under the chuppah because they had to make an El Marachimim for my mother. Another thing I could have done without.
What is that?
That's a special prayer that you say for people who are dead under the chuppah. And here you got, I got my stepmother here, and I got my granny didn't come. I still got the letter my uncle wrote to me because they couldn't have stood the strain of a wedding, knowing, well, my Bubba, Zayda was obviously not well, but he was still alive. It was awful. In the end, Abe was holding me up, holding me round the waist so I didn't fall over. It was such a long, drawn-out wedding ceremony.
So something you didn't have much influence on how it went?
I don't know, there were lots of people there. And then in Wickham's, I don't remember the food. I only remember one of my brother's friends had drawn the seating plan and done caricatures. And, that's all I can remember.
Speeches?
I cried in the toilet. I wasn't, and my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law had it hard as well because she could sense the pulling of the two kinds of my cousins I was close to, and not as close as to the cousins on Auntie Esther's side. Sure. Although one of the guys did try to get very friendly with me before I decided that I wanted to get married to somebody else. So it was a very confusing. Yes. You can imagine.
I can imagine different parts, different families coming together.
Yeah, and you see, my father couldn't understand, and you know what? And years later, I realised where he got his idea from. Do you know the Fiddler on the Roof?
Of course, yeah.
Well, when I used to go in the workshop. He used to go in the workshop about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I used to go in there early and sit on the table and talk to him while he was planning out the pieces. And I said, look, it's going to be a very difficult situation. I don't want a big wedding for the very reason I'd like a nice quiet little chuppah and that's it. No, then he tells me in Yiddish, he had a dream. My mother came to him, my mother, who we had all adored, my mother came to him in a dream and told him that I was to have a wedding. I was going to have a wedding, and that was it. And then I realised he knew the stories well from Sholem Aleichem.
Yeah. So how did he pay for it? Do you know?
Yes, with my wedding presents.
Right. So what's the story?
I had the money coming in.
Oh,
I mean, he had a bit of money. He didn't have it all. It didn't all come. But if people asked me what I wanted, I used to tell them some kitchen stuff or some bedding or some blankets. But I also got money. And I didn't want a big wedding. But, you know, and he had his elbow lifting friends as well.
Elbow lifting?
You know.
Oh, right.
There was a Jewish pub up the road in Whitechapel and Perkoff, and they invited him and Auntie Esther to their weddings. He had to ask them back.
Did he like Mum said he liked to drink.
Yes, he liked his little schnapps, but it was this company.
Yes.
And but latterly, he didn't go out so often. He couldn't take it anymore. But it wasn't a good idea.
No.
And the worst thing was, because Abe was so highly principled, he thought it was a dastardly thing to have done. He didn't talk to my father for 3 years.
Really?
Yeah, because of it. And he said, you do what you like. I said, if that is my father, you can go and see him, you can do what you like. But he said, I can't, all right? Don't. So there was this terrible split.
How did they break the ice in the end?
My father-in-law, when my twins were born, Abe went to see his father to give him Mazel Tov. And my father-in-law thought I was the cat's whiskers. He loved me, he really did. I mean, if he had a win on the dogs or the horses, I always got a few quid off him, or a present or something, always. He said to Abe in Yiddish, you know, you've got Mazel Tov, yeah, how is she, blah, blah, blah. And he said, and now my son, you know what you have to do? And Abe said yes, and he went to my father and he gave him Mazel Tov about the twins, and they never had another cross word between them, ever. Nice. My father was patient, and nobody ever made it harder for me, but it was hard for me.
Were you going to see him in this time?
Oh yes, oh yeah, I went to see him, and it was very difficult. And everybody was giving me advice, but you know, I knew in my heart that eventually Abe would give in. But he wrote a letter and sealed it. I don't know what was in it. And on the outside it said, to be given to any child of ours who's contemplating getting married. And I gave it to Jonathan when I don't know what was in it.
Oh, well, you don't know?
No. You know, the thing is that, that sort of water under a bridge.
Absolutely.
And I always believed that any arguments in families ought to be sorted out before they become enormous.
That's right. But that doesn't always happen, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Let's end on some good stuff. Tell me about your teaching.
My teaching. I got to the stage where I volunteered to be a dinner lady, and then I went to 3 years to train. I thought I was going to find it very difficult because I was going to be with 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, but apparently that they didn't see any problems for me, and I was amazed that on the very first day when the 30 girls were marched through the house in Willesden across the garden into the one-storey building, which was actually also a lecture room, a common room, and the art department. And it was sort of a bit rainy weather, and we were all bundled in this corridor, and the principal of the annex, it was called an annex, called out, "Mrs. Simons, you will find some umbrellas in the corner." And I thought, blimey, she knows who I am already? You know, 30 people, to me, were a lot of people. Yeah. How did she know who was who, you know? I thought, And so that was like my beginning. And also I wanted to do maths, and I went to, we were told that all the lecturers were there, and you could speak to whoever you wanted to see where you wanted to do your main study. So I went to the maths man, and he said, "I don't mind having you, Mrs. Simons, but he said, it's 20 years since you've been in a classroom. Maths has changed." I said, "But not basically, surely." "No." But he said, "I would suggest you go somewhere else. Come back to me if you can't fit in anywhere else." He said, "Why don't you go and try the art man?" So I went to the art man, and I said to him, "They threw me out in the 3rd year because I can't draw. But I love colour, and I can do things with my hands, and don't mind getting messy." He said, "Mrs. Simons," up to that point it was all very formal, "Mrs. Simons, I'd rather have you than a 19-year-old who thinks she's Picasso." So I said, "Well, that's fine." And so I started with 7 other girls in the art class. And by the way, it just so happens that my thesis happens to just be here because I loaned it to my cleaning lady, who was very interested. And I tie-and-dyed that, and I book-bound the thing. And where's the beginning? I did that. And the title is... Where's the title page?
Oh, the use of blue in art and craft.
Yeah. So you can see some of the stuff I did. That I tie-and-dyed.
You did all that?
All that writing, yeah.
With a special pen?
Yes, yes. And I went to see that window. And my boys, Jonathan was very interested in heraldry, so I copied something. But you see, then I even sat in museums and I painted things. That's my Yolica Italian blue. And I sewed all these pages together. And Picasso.
Beautiful.
Pardon?
It's beautiful.
And what I love is, and I went to the British Library and found in the Nelson's Concordance there's 49 entrances of the word blue in the Bible. That's Chagall. I love this one.
Lovely,
and nearly all the Madonnas are wearing a red dress and a blue mantle, or a blue dress and a red mantle, because in Hebrew the 2 words are often together in the Chumash.
Which 2 words? Red and
blue and red, yeah, and they're not 2 that should be together on the wheel. You know, you shouldn't ever put the red and blue together. Yeah. But that's made of wood.
So do you remember did you graduate? Did you have a graduation and everything?
Yeah, and you know, we had this display. There were 8 of us in the part of the single-storey building, and I had all my pottery. Some of it's still there. There's that chicken with a little head, and the blue stuff up there. You can see. I sold a lot of my pots, but I wanted to show you a picture of me as I was then. Now that's up there. I made that. That's up there, and it's a lampshade I made. And there I am. That's what I was wanting to show you.
Nice.
And this was part of my display with a tie and dye.
Like an exhibition.
Yes. And my paintings. Anything I made I turned into something useful. We had to make a mould, and so I turned them into dishes.
So did you use some of these techniques with the children?
Oh yeah, well, knowing what you can do. I've still got this part. I've got this hanging up in the hall, and this near the toilet, and this is in the kitchen. I've got this bowl somewhere forget where I've got it. This is my hors d'oeuvre dish. This one's in the kitchen. Some of it, but well, let me tell you, and this was the blue, you see. I had all this blue stuff. I've got this is in this cupboard. It was a meat dish. The next, we had set up the exhibition, 8 of us, you see, 8 or 9 of us. And the next morning when I went in, I nearly died. There'd been a fire. We had covered up, like idiots, we'd covered up the radiators with sugar paper and put things around and on top. And we all forgot that it comes on by itself. And so when I arrived, Mrs. whatever her name was, the lady who did the teas, she looked after us. She was crying and she said, Pearl, the farmer were kicking around and all these big hoses. She said, I've rescued as many of your pots as, if you call it a pot, I've rescued as many pots of yours as I could, because she said that otherwise it would have been broken.
Terrible.
And so this is the only real record of the exhibition.
Oh, good job, you took the photos.
Yeah, now Jonathan and Lester had their bar mitzvah when they were 14, not 13, because we joined the synagogue, and the rule was you had to be a member for a year before you could have a bar mitzvah. So they were 14, and I said you can have one big present, whatever you want, not 16 little people sent them money, some people gave them presents, but some with the money I said you can have what you want. Lester chose old-fashioned music scene, like with great big tapes. That was the best he could buy then. And Jonathan always went for cameras. And so he was the one, this one, a professional took that one. He was the one that took these pictures.
Just as well that you did. Look, it's 5 o'clock, should we turn it off now?
I'm going to phone him and say, thank you.